So last time we left off here where we could, well, flap our bird, and we added this function to our button by dragging our, well, Flappy Bird blue here in the onClick, well, method of our flap button. But we are going to have 3 birds in our game, so we can select from the red, green or blue bird, and we cannot add 3 birds here and select their functions, so we can only add 1. And if we add our Flappy Bird blue, then when we select our green, well, Flappy Bird, we will not be able to flap. Now, in order to fix this, we will simply select this here on click, which we added this, well, game object, and we will click this minus sign to remove it, and we are going to add this function to the button, well, through our code. Now, in order to do that, the first thing that we need to do in our script is say here using unityengine.ui, and here we are going to declare a private button, so it will be private, and here we're going to say button, and it will be flap button. And inside of our, well, awake function, we are going to get the reference to that button. So our flap button is equal to game object dot find game object with tag. So it will be find game object with tag, and here we're going to say flap button. And why we are saying flap button? Well, if we go back here and select our flap button, we see that the tag for our flap button is basically flap button, which we added here. So we can find it by its tag. And in order to get the button, because here we are finding the game object, but we need to get the component, which is the button here. So here we need to say dot get component, and here we need to specify the button component because, well, we want to get the button from that game object. So now that we have the reference to our flap button, how can we add a function to it? So we can simply write flap button dot onClick dot add listener, and this is the syntax now for adding a listener. So we will write parentheses and then equals and greater than sign, and now we will write the name of that function, which in our case is flap the bird, and we need to add also parentheses for our function. And this will add that listener the same way as we did, well, when selecting our button and going here, clicking on the plus sign, dragging the game object, well, basically what we did earlier. Now we can simply go back in the Unity editor and we can test this out. So when I run the game and flap the bird, we see that the bird is flapping. Now I want to give a little bit more life to our bird. So I want, when our bird is going down, so when we are not flapping, I want it to, well, go slowly into this direction, so facing down. Now, how can we do that? So we can simply go back in our script, and here where we are checking if we are alive, we are going to check if our rigid body velocity y is greater than or equal to 0. So if this is true, we are not going to change anything. We're simply going to say transform position, or excuse me, transform rotation is equal to quaternion, and we use quaternions to represent, well, angles. Euler, and here I'm going to say 0, 0, 0. So we are not going to change anything. Else if, so here we're going to say else, meaning that our rigid body velocity is less than 0. Here we are going to create a float and name it angle, and it's equal to 0. And here we're going to use matf, so it will be matf.lerp. And what this will do, it will go from the value that we specify, so it's 0, to the value that we specify minus 90 in time that we specify here, and the time will be minus my rigid body, so my rigid body dot velocity dot y divided by, let's say, 7. And lastly, we will simply use this here, and instead of 0 for the z-axis, we are going to pass our angle that we have just created. Now again, this matf.lerp will go from the value that we specify here, which is 0, to value minus 90 in the given time, and the time is rigid body velocity.y divided by 7. Why, well, divided by 7, you might ask? Well, basically you can experiment this and put the number that you want so that you, well, can recreate or create that smoothness that you want. And now when we test this, we will see that when we don't lerp, or excuse me, when we don't bounce or flap, our bird is facing down and going down basically. Now we will program our camera to follow our bird. So go in the scripts folder, create a camera script folder, and also create a camera script. But before we do this, or before we program our camera script, here in our bird script, we will also create one more function. So it will be public float get position x. And inside of this function, we'll simply say return, and here we're going to say transform. So let me just type it right. So it's transform.position.x, which will return the position x of our bird, basically. And now we can go in our camera script, and here we will create a public static float, and it will be offset x. And here we will simply create a function. So it will be void move the camera. And inside of this function, we will move our camera to follow the bird. So we will say vector3 temp is equal to transform.position. And our temp.x is equal to, and we are going to use our bird script .instance .get position x. Now this is, well, what I talked about when we created an instance here. So now we can simply use our bird script instance and access this function here that we, well, created, and we don't need a reference to it inside of this script. And here we'll simply say plus offset x, and we will simply say transform.position is equal to our temp and reassign it. And here in the update function, we will say if BirdScript.instance is not equal to null, meaning we have our bird inside of the game. And next we will say BirdScript.instance. So here we need to also say if. So if BirdScript.instance is alive, meaning that our bird is alive, then we will move the camera to follow the bird, because if our bird is dead, there is no sense in, well, following a dead bird. Now, regarding this offset x here, we are going to calculate it here in the bird script. That's why I set it to be static. Now we can go here and we will create a void method set cameras x like this. Inside of it, we are going to say camera script dot offset x is equal to, and here we're going to say in parentheses, so it will be camera dot main dot transform dot position dot x minus the transform position dot x of our bird, and also -1, so that we can, well, give a little bit more space. And we are going to call this function here in the awake function, so when we create our bird in the scene, basically. So now we can simply test this and make sure you attach the camera script on the camera. So now when I run the game, we will see that our camera is following our bird. So as long as our bird is going, our camera is, well, following our bird. So now what we need to do is, well, we will see that in a second. So now we don't have our background following our bird anymore. So next what we will do is we will simulate an infinite background, and we will see, well, how that goes.